the critical ideologies that have been mainstreamed in university, these are then carried into not just government by people who then end up being advisors and staff who work on campaigns, and people who get elected to city government become leaders in police departments. Probably the most important thing is that ideology then takes root completely in journalism.
And this was literally what many of us were talking about for years, saying, if you label everyone Nazis and then you say it's okay to punch a Nazi, well, you've given yourself the excuse to basically not only physically attack people, but burn down buildings and everything else. What do you make of all of the people? And we heard this a lot. I mean, I heard this a lot from my own people. Oh, Dave, this is just a college campus thing. This won't leak out into reality. Clearly, they were not correct.
I wish they were right, but we've seen, the critical ideologies that have been mainstreamed in university, these are then carried into not just government by people who then end up being advisors and staff who work on campaigns, and people who get elected to city government become leaders in police departments. Probably the most important thing is that ideology then takes root completely in journalism. So if you look in the mainstream press, you can see what's particularly happened at like America's paper of record, the New York Times or the Washington Post, and you just see how it's a hard left political monoculture that is extremely intolerant and has provided so much legitimacy to far left extremism. I mean, it's these papers who have published these really culturally significant opinion pieces in news reports as well that are sympathetic or provide a justification for property destruction, looting, and all that in the name of social justice. Online news sites and magazines are no better. They also argue for the need for violent protests. So they're undoing a lot of what were norms in the United States. And I think this is where Antifa has had the most success, not in necessarily their acts of violence and destruction, which they've have done so much, created so much misery from that, but actually that tenets of their ideology have found footing in the mainstream left and have been giving a certain legitimacy in society. And the other thing people have to realize is that for those who sympathized with, when I talk to people who are supportive of sympathizing with the Capitol Hill siege riot on the 6th of January, their response was often, well, for months and months, BLM and Antifa got to riot and respond to their grievances with violence, and that was cheered on, and nothing happened to them. So why do we have to be peaceful? So this is the danger as well, that it creates, Antifa's extremism creates reactions on the right and the far right that can lead to a lot of violence. And we've already seen a lot in 2020, and I don't think it's slowing down this year.
Yeah, do you sense that double standard where when the lefties, burn down buildings and attack private property and stop cars in the street and make people, denounce white supremacism and the litany of other things happen, do you think the double standard from the way the media covers that to the way they covered the Capitol, obviously, without excusing any of the violence of the Capitol, that really is just completely burst forth? Like, to me, at this point, CNN is not a place of journalism. The New York Times is not a place of journalism. Like, are you willing to go that far on that?
Well, what made me furious in seeing the condemnations from journalists, influential thinkers, politicians in response to the riot on the 6th of January is I wonder why they were at best silent when my city was under siege, when federal property in Portland what those rioters did on the 6th, they did that and worse last year, okay? Why were they silent then, at best? And then at worst, some of them actually were promoting these crowdfunding campaigns to get some of these accused riot suspects back on the streets.
Right, so quite literally, I mean, there were Hollywood celebrities and quote-unquote journalists putting money in and crowdfunding to get rioters that had done violent acts, illegal acts, to get them out of jail. Not that they would have really been prosecuted in Portland or Seattle anyway. However, I'm fairly certain if anyone on the right, if Glenn Beck or Ben Shapiro had done a GoFundMe to get some of the January 6 people, even if they hadn't been violent, out of jail, I think it might have been taken a little differently. Are you shocked how quickly the liberals have just folded on this thing? You know my feelings on this, sort of, that this is what we've seen Antifa do to the left is sort of it's the death end of liberalism, sort of, and I've watched so many of my friends just not be able to understand that. Are you shocked that liberals seem to have no defense mechanism against this?
I'm not shocked anymore, given what's happened in the past 5 years. I mean, when liberals systematically failed to really defend what the academy should be about, that was the first sign, right? If they're not willing to defend freedom of expression, speech in academic institutions, I don't think they would defend it outside of that. So I'm not shocked, but I think the reason why Antifa have become really powerful is because they do have many, many sympathizers and supporters on the mainstream left, people who don't understand or don't know Antifa's violent extremist ideology, who really think that these are just merely people who are anti-fascist, who are going out to protect people of color on the street from neo-Nazis. I think, and it's a willful ignorance because, yes, a lot of the media has been so reckless in their coverage of Antifa, but there's also been some good coverage. And, my work has been printed in mainstream publications and all that. But it's just, the rule that's been laid out is essentially you can do anything and everything, including kill, for the alleged cause of racial justice and social justice. So when you lay that out as like the context for all these things to happen, there's no ability for the left to really be able to counter, and it should be pretty easy, but Antifa, people think that if you're against them, that means you're pro-FA. If you're against BLM, people will accuse you of being against Black Americans, instead of diving into looking at what these movements actually espouse and what they do.
Have you been able to break down some of the numbers on this? Like how many of them actually are there? How many of them are actually taking part in the violent attacks? Versus, I think a lot of the people, when I see like their sort of allies in the media, like I would look at somebody like Jake Tapper. I don't think he's like a promoter of Antifa. I think he probably wishes they didn't exist, but he's the type of guy that just won't really tweet when they're burning down a city. But if the right wing does, anyone on the right does anything, it's insurrection. So have you been able to figure out just like how many foot soldiers there are versus how many just sort of self-hostages in the media who just don't want to get attacked? Just sort of a general breakdown of the amorphous thing.
So exact numbers across the U.S. would be, I think, impossible to calculate just because there's no, in terms of a lot of these Antifa organizations, we have actually no idea how many people are involved. In my book, I look specifically because I got leaked public documents internally from Rose City Antifa, which is the Portland Antifa organization, the largest one in the U.S. So I can give estimates for, let's say, Portland, because we have so many data points of how many of recurring nightly riots, how many people come. And for that, it can range anywhere from as little as 50 people to thousands. I notice consistently, though, the number of people who are actually donning their black uniforms, which is part of the black bloc tactics, and those who are committing the acts of violence, that number's really, even at its peak, no more than a couple hundred. So if there was a political will, and that's the important word here is political will, to stop this wanton extremism and violence and destruction, it can be done easily. However, the mayor really actually continuously was giving sort of excuses for them, saying like, oh, I understand that you're protesting against racial injustice and systemic racism. And just anytime you buy into that narrative, you're giving legitimacy to their cause.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about the media instead of nonstop yelling, check out our media playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out the full episode playlist. They're both right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.